Okay. Good. Where's the mic? Are we on? Is it on? We're on? Hi, people. Hello, Peter. Sweethearts. Okay. All right. Huh? And I suppose you should introduce me as well. I might be the wrong. He did already. Oh well. You didn't? Well, just brief. No dramas.
Okay.
I mean, just
No drama.
I mean, keep it simple.
So here's a very unprepared introduction. I think have you are the calendar keeper? 5-6 years ago? 6 years ago, we met Venerable Robina at teaching very much like that in New York for the first time. And Venerable Robina is also the first person that I personally heard Dharma from. So very, very special. So special that we ended up getting on the plane and going to New York to meet her. Next thing we know, she asked us if we have time for breakfast with her. And the next day, we are having breakfast with her, and she says, "Why won't you start a study group in Zurich?"
Well, you must have said something to lead me to that.
Something, I'm not sure. At that point, we had no idea about anything yet, but that idea was planted in our minds, and we started this study group about 3 years ago. And it's a very special time for us. Robina is for the first time at this location. And you probably noticed that the location maybe is not yet very perfect because we've only been here for...
But it's gorgeous. You've got an outside, you've got a little thing, you've got a top floor, it's all yours. It's going to be a divine place.
It's all ours. And we've been working really hard, like day and night for the last maybe 2 months, getting things all ready. Many of us, Roxanne, Jelena, were here, Julia, sticking every single of these stones of the altar. So Jelena is the designer of it. She's the artist. And here we go. Venerable Robina finally arrived here, and we have been waiting very, very, very much for this Venerable Robina. Venerable Robina is a very special personality, so if I want to keep it short, I probably
Keep it short, darling, really.
She is an ex-political activist, a bodyguard to His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Well, one event for 5 weeks.
She edited the Mandala magazine. She is the founder of the Prison Liberation Project, which helps prisoners around the world to learn Buddhist teachings and meditation to liberate their minds, at least from the prison. And she has been on the road for the last few years, sleeping in, I don't know how many beds, Venerable, per year. I don't know if you count.
I sleep around about 70, 80 beds a year.
So we are very, very lucky that the last night's bed was in Zurich. We're so happy to see you.
Good.
So happy to see you guys here. I know that some of you came from very far, people flying in, driving in from all kinds of locations. We are super excited to have you here. This is what makes it worth it. I mean, for two of us, Chris and I, or maybe for Julia and Roxanne, I'm not sure if Venerable would take her time to come, so we are so lucky.
Happy.
To have you here.
Now I have one request. I know I'm always fussy about where I'm sitting, but for some reason in this group, I don't need to be so high because I can see everybody. Not people sitting in chairs. So let's just whip away this white thing. Can we do that?
Yes.
Did you build it especially for me?
Yes, but we can. But it's no problem. We can do
Come
it.
on. Well, maybe use it another time when look at it. It looks very nice. Oh, no, I see. It's got all this stuff underneath. Leave it. No.
I can fold it, unfold it, and put it away.
Oh, really?
It'll take about 2 minutes, yes.
So it's all specially built.
Yes, it's all specially built.
Oh, look at that. This is. That's how clean people in Switzerland do things. I remember one Lama when he came to Switzerland, he was asked what he thought about it. He said, it's so clean, and you keep on cleaning it. But it's true, and that's the karma. That's the karma called environmental karma. The environmental karma of the environmental karma being clean, the environmental karma of non-attachment from past lives, particularly non-sexual attachment. You must have all been very moral to have a nice, clean environment. It's not because you put your bottles in the bottle thing and the plastic in the plastic thing. It's from past life karma. Anyway. Okay, that's better. Now I feel better. But it's appropriate this time because everyone's on the floor, you see. If it's all in chairs, it's different. Okay. So I'm going to sing a little prayer to set us in the right direction for this time together. Prayers in Buddhism are really mostly aspirations. May this, may that. And so because in Buddhist view, which we're going to talk about, every thought counts. Every thought kind of imprints something in the mind, creates a habit. So prayers are marvelous, you know. So we're thinking the first two lines, it's for those of us in the room who already identify with being Buddhist. So we're just reiterating our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings and so on. The second two lines are this aspiration. We're going to listen to these words, these teachings, and that includes me, to hear it as advice. That's how it's given, it's advice. But like all advice that people give you, you're the boss, you don't have to take it, you can choose to take it. But it is advice. Advice for what? Well, two things, really. The first part is advice for how to put ourselves together, how to become this marvelous, marvelous person. To be less neurotic, less fearful, less depressed, less angry, less low self-esteem, more kind, more wise, more compassionate, more useful. Very simply, that's the essence of the advice of all of Buddhist teachings from A to Z. And then the essential purpose of all that is finally, because then we're qualified to help others. Bottom line. So for this reason, I think we're sitting here, listening to these teachings. And I'll sing it in Tibetan. Sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penjir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la jangchu badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penjir sangye drupa shog sangye charang soke chognam la Jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chönyen gipe sonam ki drola penchir sange dropa shok. Okay. So saying the Buddha's advice is to help us get less neurotic, less depressed, less miserable, more kind, more wise sounds so simple it's almost embarrassing, doesn't it? It seems, wow, that sounds nice. What's the recipe, please? You know. Well, another way of putting it, what all of Buddhism is from A to Z, all the extensive metaphysics, psychology, the philosophy, all the techniques of meditation, all of it, all this vast body of knowledge, which indeed it is, several thousand years old, coming from the amazing body of knowledge that preceded it, these incredible Hindus, these amazing Indians. As His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, you know, it was these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago who are the ones who really began the investigation into the nature of reality, the nature of self. Of course, we Anglo, white, whatever we are people, Europeans, we think probably Mr. Freud invented it, didn't we? A couple of hundred years ago, you know. What do we know about India? Absolutely zero. But it was these amazing Indians, this extraordinary history, this body of knowledge, this literature that is vast, you know, about which we know nothing in our culture. So in all of those teachings, you know, one way of presenting all of Buddha's teachings, all of Buddha's views, metaphysics, psychology, philosophy, is it's a method, it's a series of techniques, it's a method for stopping suffering and getting happiness. Even more simple than what I just said before, you know. This is literally the point. Another way of presenting the whole thing is in terms actually of the meaning of the word Buddha. That's Sanskrit, and the Tibetan equivalent, Sangye. This tells us everything. Sang implies the utter eradication from one's own mind, one's own very being, one's own consciousness, of all ego and all the voices of ego, all the fears and anxiety and the dramas that we are utterly familiar with and which we in our world, our modern psychology, utterly believe are at the core of our being. There's an absolute given for all of us. This is who we are, you know. But it's very shocking. So it's shocking to hear what Buddha's saying. That no, we can get rid of this stuff. Sang implies the utter eradication from one's mind of all this nonsense. But not only that, he says, you can become a Sangye. Gye, the development to perfection of all the other stuff. Clarity, kindness, wisdom, generosity, well-being, joy, all these things that we know are also in us and that we know are the nice things. This is really using simple language. But don't underestimate it, So that's Sangye. And the Buddha is saying, hey guys, this is what I've achieved, and this is my methodology. Over to you. If you'd like to achieve the same for yourself, follow those steps. That's it. And that's what being a Buddhist means. A person who chooses to take these views on board, So then if the goal is to rid the mind of all the rubbish, why? Because the Buddha's view is that causes the suffering, and we can get rid of the suffering and its causes, therefore the delusions, and to develop perfection, all the goodness. Why? Because that's the source of happiness. So another way of presenting the entirety of Buddha's view, So it seems very logical then. If you want happiness, or even indeed if you want to go one step further and say, yes, I would like to be more loving, I'd like to be more compassionate, I'd like to be more wise, more brave, more courageous, more joyful, oh yes, then here's Buddha's methodology. So what part of us becomes a Sangye? Well, in order to understand this, each of us can have our own view in this room. Everybody would have a different view of what is happiness, what is suffering, and indeed what are the causes. Everybody would have a very different view. But as it's Buddha who's saying this, this is Buddha's deal, we better know what he means by where does suffering exist and where do the causes of suffering exist if we want to get rid of them, and equally the happiness and the causes of happiness. So it's kind of logical. We've got to hear it logically. But often what happens is when we speak in spiritual terms, like we're doing here, and we know we're not discussing gardening or mathematics, so we have our kind of spiritual hats on, not our practical hats. Well, that's wrong. Keep your practical hat on, please. Because it's the same precision and clarity and depth of analysis and logic that we know we need to use to even make a cake, to grow a garden, to do anything, is exactly what Buddha demands we use to do this job of becoming a Sangye, of producing our own Sangye, of doing the job of lessening suffering and growing happiness. So we need to understand the words. First step, You don't make a cake and Mummy says put a teaspoon of sugar. Well, you can't identify as teaspoon, you will never get you won't get the right cake. You've got to be on the same page, what a teaspoon is. It's exactly the same here. And it quite surprises us because we don't think in those terms when we come to spiritual. So then which part of us does this potential for happiness and freedom from suffering exist? And therefore, which part of us does the job of freeing ourselves from suffering and growing happiness? Well, it's called our mind. It's called our mind. So that's a word we all know. And because we're modern, we're philosophical materialists, most of us, we know we are referring to the brain because we only posit physical things. Now with these amazing conversations, especially with His Holiness the Dalai Lama and all that mob, conversations with scientists and modern people, the last 30, 40 years, only now as they're coming together, this marvelous discussions, bringing together these views, these seemingly utterly different views from different worlds, showing the common ground, which is amazing. And that's the skill of His Holiness. It's his initiative, and he's incredible what he's achieved. So now, meeting definitely the philosophical materialist views, the scientific people have really been moved and touched and affected by their experiences with the Dalai Lama and learning a little bit about this amazing Indian body of knowledge. Buddha's view of the universe, Buddha's view of being, Buddha's view of consciousness. But always to remind ourselves of one point, which I continue to repeat this, it's so important. Where does this information come from? Well, putting it in a perfect way, from our modern philosophical scientific perspective, this is the only time I've ever been asked this question on this planet. I notice we all ask the same questions, but this one I've only heard once. A scientist in New Zealand, 10 years ago, in Nelson, and he said, who revealed these teachings to the Buddha? Which is a perfect question if you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Jew or any of the creator religions. If that's your viewpoint, because and the thing is, but that's our view of religion. We conflate religion with believing in a creator. That's not the way Buddhists think about it at all. You ask a Buddhist, are you religious? Oh yeah. Oh, you believe in a creator? Oh no. We conflate those words. It's not the Buddhist view. So the usual view we have in our world, and the only ones we tend to understand, are the ones that assert a creator. So this question he asked is perfect. Because teachings, by definition, religious teachings by definition, are coming from a creator, a being on high, who is the boss, who is the creator, who then because they're the boss, punishes and rewards, and that's their job because they made the place and made me and made the laws. That's perfectly reasonable. And when I told him, well, nobody, I said, would you ask Einstein who revealed E equals mc squared to him? Of course he was laughed and everybody was shocked. But that's the approach in Buddhism. And even though we hear these words, which are very simple, it takes us a while to hear this. Because our assumptions of what is religion are quite deep. And initially we don't accept it. Nah, come on. But Buddha, in that sense, everything that's called Buddhism, that's valid, and I'll tell you there's a load of rubbish published on this planet, especially in the modern world. We don't think it matters. Because we think it's religion, we don't think it has to be tested. I mean, people do more rigorous testing just to publish a cookbook than they do to publish a nice book about meditation because they had a vision in their meditation last week and now they write their own book. Really, that's our attitude towards religion, which is incredibly insulting. So the Buddha is not a creator. He doesn't assert a creator. In fact, you could say quite simply, as far as his view is concerned, we don't need creating. And because he's got a very different take on everything. He's not criticizing people. He just says it's not his view. Meaning, not his observation. So Buddha, like Einstein, he's saying, here's my methodology. And where's it come from? My experience. And what's that mean? He, with his own experience, his own mind, has observed the universe. He hasn't made up something in his head. He's observed the universe. He's observed beings, minds. And he says, this is what I found to be so. This is what I've achieved as a result of it. This is what is true. That's what a scientist says. Einstein doesn't go, well, I think E equals mc squared. It could be F. But it's, maybe this, it's all the same anyway. No, he wouldn't talk like that. But he wouldn't ask you to believe him. He wouldn't say he had a vision of it. He would not tell you it was revealed to him. That's how we think about religion. But Buddha would not talk in the same way. This is what I found to be so. Where have you got it from, Buddha? My own hard work, my mind, my own observation of reality. So he's saying, this is reality. Don't have to believe me. And by applying all this, this is where it leads you to. Your achievement of your own Sangye. The achievement of the ridding of your own mind of all the nonsense, and therefore your suffering, and the development to perfection in your own mind of all the goodness, therefore your happiness. And now your capability to be of benefit to others. But it's the exact same attitude. So to understand that, we have to know what he means by the mind. And that's where the radical difference is. We have to know these things. We can't just say, oh, I like Buddhism, oh yeah, I believe in karma. I mean, again, you don't say, oh, I don't believe in math. Oh, you believe in mathematics? Yes. I'm happy for you. It works. Other people use it. It's very good. But what if your mother says, go buy 5 oranges? If you can't count, if you can't use mathematics, merely believing in mathematics is useless to you. It doesn't help. And we want to really get that difference between knowing something and believing it. So, okay, so let's look at what Buddha says the mind is, because that's where all the work has to be done. That's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says. First of all, the word mind is used synonymously, broadly speaking, with the word consciousness. They don't have a different flavour. Often in the West, we think consciousness has more of a sense of a depth or something. No, it's just another word. It's another word for mind. First. Second, it's referring to a much vaster spectrum of experiences than the way we use the word in the modern world. Third point, I'll go back these two together. It does not, the word does not refer to the brain. So if you're a neuroscientist, don't be shocked or think this is a load of nonsense. There are ways to put these two things together, which is what these amazing scientists and the Dalai Lama and his mob are all doing. You know, much of it published now, I think. Buddha does not argue we've got a brain. How can he? But you ask these amazing meditators, before the Buddha, the Indians, before the Buddha came along, these amazing geniuses thousands of years before him, who are the ones who came up with much of the stuff that is now in the Buddhist worldview still, but he's got his own take on it. They're the ones who created this extraordinary, skillful psychological technique called single-pointed concentration, which the world vaguely knows as mindfulness meditation, you know. It's a technique that these genius thinkers, spiritual practitioners, philosophers came up with well before the Buddha. And what it is this extraordinary, skillful, disciplined technique that enables you to completely subdue the grosser level of consciousness, which is when the brain is functioning and the senses are functioning and our conceptuality is functioning, which is all we posit as the mind in our culture. But utterly to subdue that, to cease it, but not to become unconscious. Unconscious at the gross level, yes, but then you can learn, you can see with this rigorous disciplined clarity that you've cultivated in this meditation technique, you've learned to access a subtler level of your own cognitive process, your own consciousness. It's a subtler level of consciousness, which is not visible to the eyes, which you cannot see under a microscope, and which does not depend upon a brain, or a body for that matter. This is part of the knowledge in the East for thousands of years, but we arrogant modern scientists have so much hubris, thinking we're the smarty pants of the universe, and all these idiots for thousands of years before us haven't seen the truth, and we finally found the truth. I mean, it's kind of rude, you know, to begin to read some of the vast literature, which is what's happening more and more now. I mean, Wisdom has got a whole series, Wisdom Publications, a whole series of books now. This is all, you know, really spearheaded by Thupten Jinpa, Geshe Thupten Jinpa, who's a layman now, lives in Canada. Amazing literature, translating more and more of this incredible literature from this extraordinary body of knowledge, well before the Buddha even, plus all the Buddhist knowledge that came since, which is, as I said, unknown to us in the modern world. It's extraordinary. So we've got these subtler levels of mind, in other words. And eventually, when you've accomplished this, what they call in English, calm abiding, single-pointed concentration. In Lama Yeshe's recent book that I edited, this very beautiful book, I should have reminded you to get copies. We should have had it this time, have copies available. Mahamudra, yeah. It's a very beautiful book, very special. I might read a bit. Okay, but you can get it for everybody to buy their own. I'll read you a bit from it this weekend. It's very moving. In there, you know, Lama was very radical in the way that he would try and get us excited to practice, you know. So he's got a chapter, the amazing benefits, the unbelievable, the incredible benefits of single-pointed concentration. He talks about some of the qualities that you would cultivate, having accessed this level of your own mind, you know, and the power our mind has. None of this is in our modern view. None of it. It's like weird, mystical stuff, you know, extraordinary capacity our mind has got. So the point I'm getting at here is mind, one, it refers to your cognitive process itself. Gross consciousness, subtle, this is a tantric model. There's subtle consciousness, which the only time we ever access that vividly is when we dream or when we're in a coma, but we don't have any control over it, but that's subtle consciousness, which does not depend upon a brain. And then even what they call, in this model, very subtle consciousness. We have this spectrum from gross to subtle to very subtle, of the capacity of cognition, our capacity for cognition. That's our consciousness, that's our mind. So it's much subtler. Buddha asserts much subtler levels, which then makes it even theoretically easier for us to comprehend then why the Buddha, you know, why then the Buddha would talk about how mind doesn't begin, the next quality is it doesn't begin in your mother's womb. If you're a Christian, you agree at least on one thing with the philosophical materialists. You began in your mummy's womb. In the one case, God made you. In the other case, mummy and daddy made you. We at least agree on that you both got a creator. Buddha disagrees with both. We don't need creating, babe, Buddha says. So Buddha, where do I come from? Not mummy and daddy. We don't track ourselves back to another source. That's weird for the Buddha. We track our own consciousness back to itself. It's a river, think of it like a river of mental moments, starting now that goes back, unbroken chain of mental moments. If you keep going back inexorably, you'll get back to the first second of conception. Well, where do you go back to the second before conception? Well, the egg goes back to mummy's body and sperm goes back to daddy's body, and before that there was God, so never mind that one. Your consciousness goes back to a previous, obviously the subtler level. A few weeks before that, it was in another body, and so on and so forth. And from the Buddhist perspective, as mad as it sounds, but just stating it here, and it'll come up again and again, because the only logical deduction for the Buddha is it's a beginningless continuity of mental moments. It's the product of cause and effect. And also it's endless. So the Buddha's view is, in that sense, we don't need creating, we're already existing. And the law that governs this consciousness, the law that governs what this consciousness feels, what I feel, the quality of my life, my happiness, my suffering, there's a natural law that Buddha says he has observed, and that's called the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. So these are the nuts and bolts, understanding the way the mind works, and understanding this law of karma that runs the universe, or the universe runs within. No one made it up, because there's no creator. He's observed it, like a good botanist has observed the laws of botany, like Einstein has observed the laws of whatever. This is the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist daily practice, Buddhist view, Buddhist philosophy, Buddhist psychology. And therefore the stuff that one uses to apply in one's daily life to do the job of becoming one's own Buddha. So your mind is not physical. Doesn't mean you haven't got a brain. Doesn't mean there's not an intimate relationship. Of course there is. The mind does not come from mummy and daddy. Your mind does not come from a creator. Your mind doesn't come from nowhere. And it's got much subtler levels. And finally, as we've said, it's got this amazing, outrageous, over-the-top potential to be utterly rid of all the rubbish and totally developed in all the goodness. That's the essence of Buddha's view, and that's what the mind is. So that's what we have to discuss. So what do you do with this information if you haven't, let's say you've heard it for the first time, or the 21st time? Why it would be difficult for us to even hear it is only because we have another bunch of views in our mind that contradict it. And usually those views, we've been brought up with them, and we don't question them. I don't think any materialist, anybody, would ever question, are you sure my mother and father made me? We would never question. We take it as a given, you know. So yes, Buddha says they very kindly did give you a body. There's no problem there. He's not arguing with that. That's why we've got to have this understanding that mind and body are not equivalent. In order to understand Buddhism, we've got to understand that. You don't have to agree with Buddha. You take it as your hypothesis. It's very simple. And you might discover that Buddha's wrong, in which case, thank you, Buddha, bye-bye. No problem. Mummy and Daddy did give you a body, no problems. But they did not give us love, hate, jealousy, compassion, psychosis, being good at music or football. And God didn't give you either. Nobody else did. In fact, the more I can say is the more, being a so-called Western person, immersing myself in this stuff, taking these views as my working hypothesis, the more weird it seems that you can get anger from someone else, that you can get musicianship from someone else, that you can get psychosis from someone else. It just doesn't fit with the Buddhist view. And this is really a central thing to get clear about, that's got a really powerful implication in day-to-day practice. That my mind, what's in it, my tendencies, my characteristics, they are mine. This is a massive starting point to really understand the basics of Buddhist practice. And it takes time. Only, not because the words are difficult. They're not difficult words. These are easy words. But only because the views they represent are absolutely opposite to the views entrenched in our mind now, that we take as default mode. That's why it's difficult hearing, because we have a whole series of other assumptions, which very much means that what the Buddha is demanding us to do is really look into our assumptions and don't assume that what I think is true. Don't assume what I feel is how it really is. Now, we'd say that's what scientists do. Well done, Buddha says, because that's what he says I have done, and that's the job you should do. Dealing with your own reality, with who you are, and indeed with the reality of the universe in front of us. This is the approach in Buddhism. So there's so many ways of presenting this information, so many doorways into it. So as I said, one way of presenting all of Buddhism is a series of methods for how to stop suffering and get happiness for yourself. And therefore, once you've got it down, you can help others. Another way of presenting all of Buddhism is in terms of being it's a system of ethics. Absolutely, totally true. It's another way of presenting. It's a system of getting rid of ignorance and getting wisdom, and they all come to the same point. And this is what's interesting, because I think one of the things in our culture, our modern scientific culture, we are geniuses. Intellectually, we are geniuses. I mean, unbelievably brilliant minds. Brilliant, unbelievable, intellectual brilliance, you know. Look at the product of our intellectual brilliance. It's very clear. It's astonishing. It's a marvellous quality. But I think we can see fairly clearly that it has no relationship necessary to ethics, and it has no relationship necessarily to being happy or not. So you could have the genius scientist who's discovered the greatest law since 1,000 years. Pulitzer Prizes, medals, God knows what. And she goes home and beats up her husband. Clearly didn't help her become happy, did it? And it didn't have anything to do with morality. We see all these as distinct, different little packages of viewpoints. But for the Buddha, they utterly, logically, you don't force it, but inexorably come together in one thing. Because, one way of putting it, the extent Buddha, and this is where we have to understand his view of the mind, because that's the crux of it. So, in the Buddhist model of the mind, there's two different ways our mind works. In all the literature, it's described in great detail in the Buddhist literature. And they study all this in great depth in the Tibetan Buddhist monastic university system. You know, your mind works from a sensory point of view. You have sensory consciousness. Then you have mental consciousness. Well, the mental consciousness is where the workshop is. And Tibetans point here for the mind. They don't use the word mind and heart like we do as a separate thing, because they don't mean, when they say mind, they're not meaning intellect. It includes it all. So it's a very different way they use the word mind. And only as a Buddhist did you get used to that. Now, because I'm used to the Buddhist way of using the mind, I don't use the materialist view, thinking my brain, you know. You just got to get used to it, if you choose. So the word mind encompasses all of this. So your mental consciousness, that's where the workshop is, as Lama Zopa says, you know. That's where your intellect is. Your feelings, emotions, this massive world of our feelings and emotions, so-called negative, neurotic, deluded, psychotic, loving, compassionate, wise, saintly, whatever you like, the entire spectrum. That's your mind. Your unconscious, subconscious, instinct, intuition, you name it, this entire spectrum. Mind refers to all of this, you know. So, in the description, then when you study the mind in Buddhism, you study the epistemological model of the mind, which itself is utterly fascinating. I'm sure scientists, modern scientists, would love to study it because it's so sophisticated. But they've got to posit the possibility that they're not describing the brain, they're describing the actual process of the way the consciousness works. It's so sophisticated, and it comes from these Indians before the Buddha. It's thousands of years old. It's amazing. And when you read it, of course, it's so arcane. But it's an incredibly ingenious description of the way the mind functions, and we're not talking the brain. It is amazing. We'll touch on a bit of it. And where do these dudes get this information from? Not from watching the brain, but from using the microscope of their own mind at a subtle level in concentration meditation. It's the most sophisticated system. It's amazing, ingenious, I can't tell you. It's a total internal process. They've mapped the mind internally. So the epistemological model, you learn about the sensory, you learn about the mental. Then you learn in the mental, you've got conceptuality, you've got this, you've got all the variations of many, many, many things. It's utterly fascinating. Then you have then we look into the mental consciousness itself, and we look at the psychological model, and that's what we're going to talk about. The contents of our mind, the names of the bits and pieces in here that are ours. So he's got this, again, deceptively simple, even seemingly simplistic way of packaging the contents of the mind, you know. Negative, positive, neutral. It sounds like ridiculous, you know. But it's got very technical meaning. Don't think it as moralistic. It's got a technical meaning. The negative ones, there are various synonyms. And if you know, Lama Yeshe was amazing. Lama Yeshe, he passed away in 83 or something, 84. And he's the beginning of this organisation that this centre is part of. He was my first teacher. And he had this very wonderful, wonderful down-to-earth way of talking. When I read you from Mahamudra, you'll see what I'm saying. Very sweet, simple way of talking, incredible. And in the text, there's one word that's used in the Sanskrit text that's translated into the Tibetan, which is always translated into the English as the main synonym for this heading called negative, and it's the word affliction. Okay? Well, Lama never used it, and I never used it, but Lama, I think he just knew intuitively it was a dumb word, it's arcane, it's old-fashioned. I mean, do you say, oh, darling, you wake up in the morning, Nina says, oh, darling, I've got such an affliction today. Do we talk like that even in your language? We don't, do we? It's a very ancient term, but that's the term that's predominantly used. It's the best translation of the Sanskrit and the Tibetan. Well, Lama never used it. I think he just knew. He knew, even when he first met Westerners, he just knew the words would work for our mind. When you read Lama Yeshe from the very beginning, it was like he'd been a hippie for 40 years already. He just kind of knew how to talk to us. It's amazing. Well, I identified in this book, and I wrote in the preface, that Lama came up with 21 different synonyms for affliction in his wish to convey to us the meaning of it. Negative state of mind, neurotic state of mind, conceptual puzzle. I mean, the most wonderful phrases. I'll tell you later, to try and convey the way these unhappy states of mind function. Well, another thing I like to point out, the word affliction, if you look it up, it means a problem. It is a problem. It means a problem. Well, what kind of problem? A mental problem. Well, what's the word for problem? Illness. It's a mental illness. That's very shocking. I don't know if what do you guys do? German, don't you? Do you call it German? Do you call it Swiss German? What do you speak? You call it that? That's the name of your language. Okay. So in Swiss German, do you when you say mental illness, that's pretty intense? You don't use that term. Huh? No one's saying anything. What do you call the general word in psychiatry when people got a really serious mental problem? Is it called a mental illness? People? It is that, okay. It sounds shocking, doesn't it? It sounds, oh my God, she's got a mental illness, but I'm normal sort of thing. Well, I'm not a joke, and I'm really serious here. Affliction is mental illness is a perfect translation for the Sanskrit klesha, for the Tibetan, whatever it is, something. I don't know. It's a perfect word, so basically really Buddha's saying, as long as we have these things, we're all mentally ill. It's just a question of degree. I say that, and I mean it precisely and literally, but it's too shocking to hear it. So what are the names of some of these mental illnesses that he says we've got that are the source of our suffering, which he says we can get rid of? Well, he's identified 84,000. I think the psychiatric volumes, maybe they got up to 84,000, I don't know, come up with new names of psychiatric illnesses. Well, Buddha identified 84,000 distinct different mental illnesses, and he's referring to something in the mind, every single one of them. But luckily, he narrows it down to 3. The 3 poisons. We know about the 3 poisons. Well, look at that. There's a beautiful phrase these days. We use it in English. I don't know about you do it in Swiss German. Toxic emotions. Have you heard that one? Toxic emotions. It's a very common phrase. Well, what a wonderful phrase. It's a perfect way, the 3 poisons. Well, these 3 toxic emotions, we can spend the rest of our 2 days, not to mention the next 2 years, just on these 3. And I tell you, they will give us a profound understanding of our own mind and why we suffer, and therefore of other people and why they suffer. On the face of it, it's simplistic. But the depth of it is incredible, And of course, it just takes time to unpack these 3. You can, it's like you're here for the first time, E equals MC squared, and you can repeat the formula. But how long will it take you to internalize it? Same here, I tell you. Then the second category of states of mind, they're called positive, virtuous. Well, some of the negative ones, the 3, let's say the 3, well, any of the negative ones, just blah, blah. Anxiety, jealousy, depression, anger, craving, arrogance. We know those words intimately. We don't make it so simple in modern psychology. We give other names to them, But the Buddha still sticks to these simple words. This hasn't changed in thousands of years. Then you've got and Buddha says they are the ones that are the source, and this is the point about them. And this is we can't hear, because when we hear these, we get guilty. Because we know we're being accused. Oh, you're so arrogant. So we get guilty. But what Buddha's actually trying to point out to us, and this is crucial to understand, then our whole view changes, that sweetie pies, precious ones, he's saying, my beloveds, he's saying, these are why you suffer. And of course, then obviously on the basis of these is why we do dumb things to harm others. But the crucial piece at the beginning of practice, the Buddha's trying to get us to see, is that these are the source of our own pain. But it takes us a while because all we do is get guilty and feel like bad girls, and bad boys. Such a misconception, such a wrong conclusion, which is why it's so painful to see them. We're trying to push them away and blame others for them. But these are why we suffer. These are the source, Buddha says, of our suffering and pain. And it's the same for the entire universe. So the second category of states of mind, positive. Well, we know these: love, compassion, generosity, forgiveness. We know these. These, he says, are the source of your happiness. Not to mention the basis upon which you will then do good things to other people. It's kind of logical. Well, the third category, they call them neutral, but this is misleading. It's not as if they're not important. But neutral has a very specific meaning here insofar as it means not negative in their nature, and therefore the cause of suffering, and not positive or virtuous in their nature, and therefore the cause of happiness. They're like, I like to call them the mechanics of our mind. And everybody needs these. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. You understand? Concentration. There's many of these mechanics, many of these. And Buddhist psychology deals very deeply. And in the end, as we get to meditate, as we learn to become better and better meditators, better and better brilliant meditators, we can identify precisely each of these different cognitive processes of our own mind. The skill that we can develop to know our own mind intimately is absolutely not how we think of it in our modern psychology. It's very fascinating. In fact, in modern science, psychology is on the bottom of the rung, I think. It's the least important because we don't trust the mind. We think it's just subjective. We have no methods for having clarity about the way the cognitive process works. As long as you've got a microscope and a clever brain and can articulate things out there, that's real science, we think. Whereas the Buddha, the exact opposite. Everything comes from here, So negative, positive, and neutral. So again, the neutral, if you're a meditator, you need good concentration. So then, if in that sense, concentration becomes a useful tool for you to do something useful. But if you're a murderer, a sniper, let's say, you need brilliant concentration. You're going to kill the wrong person. Do you understand? So concentration is just the same concentration, but you're using it to harm others. Concentration here is using it to develop yourself. So these, in that sense, they're neither negative nor positive. That's the meaning, So that's the three. There's no fourth category of states of mind in this model. Can we loosen it a little bit? Who did the microphone? Can we loosen it, darling? Looks like we can. Anyway, any questions before we continue? Any questions? Nothing? Yeah, good. Where are you? I can't see you. Who's talking? Where are you? Oh yeah, I'll come without my glasses. It's no good. So I'll put my glasses. Come here. Go talk to me, darling. Talk to me. Yes. Yeah. Done what, darling? Yes. Give an example of the thing you're talking about. Don't be too private, just something simple. Yes. 50 years ago. Yes. 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 And I find a line of thought in my mind saying, listen, kid, you have to do this or to do that to make sure that you're right. And then I think, bloody hell, what does that mean? Okay, Erhard, listen, it's not that complicated why all these thoughts come in our mind. I'll try and give a brief explanation, taking the Buddha's view. That he says, he says they're just a bunch of habits from having thought these things before. But the trouble is, the way to put it very simply, the Buddha, okay, first of all, the Buddha would say there's not a single, even forget past lives, Erhard, but we've got to posit past lives for the bigger picture one, that every millisecond of what we ever think, not to mention what we do and say, which reinforces what we think, none of that goes astray. But also, so it just all goes in and leaves seeds. So we're planting billions of seeds of thoughts every day. But put it this way, Erhard, we never bother to do any gardening. So there's utter chaos in there. There's the weeds and the flowers all entangled because we don't have methods for gardening or for editing all these thoughts. We don't have techniques in our culture to learn to concentrate. We don't have a method for identifying each of these thoughts. We don't know where they come from. So they're just this utter chaos, and they build up day after day after day, not to mention life after life. So we think chaos and uncontrolled thoughts are normal. They are normal only because we've done nothing about them. And Buddha's expertise is our ability to learn to work with this stuff, to unpack and unravel it, and to bring unbelievable radiant control over everything in the mind. That's exactly what being a Buddhist is. But it needs hard work. Does that make sense? That's the job. So and one of the ways to say it then, until we've got even some semblance of single-pointed concentration, and Erhard, 99% of us won't get it because it's an easy technique, but we've got to spend a lot of time doing it. And to really do it properly, you've got to give up sex, drugs and rock and roll and go to the mountains and several years in one place, which right now many of our contemporaries are doing at this second and have been doing since the time of the Buddha. So it is there available to us. But even without even doing some semblance of concentration, still it's hard work. But there's other things we can do to make us more brave in the day-to-day. One of the first things, when we understand the bigger picture of how this is all the stuff in our mind, we haven't got concentration. But by practicing good ethics every day, that's gardening. That's good gardening. Because with ethics, the very first level of practice before you go anywhere near your mind, if we learn to attempt to control the servants of our mind, our body and speech, and then don't shout at everybody we don't like and don't kill the ants and the mother or whoever it is you want to kill, then if we at least subdue and calm down the servants of the mind, the negative ones, then that'll help calm the chaos in there. That's the first step. Then we can really begin to get to the work of dealing with the actual thoughts themselves, the conceptual stories. That's being your own therapist, as Rama Yeshe puts it. But this is our full-on daily job. But the bigger picture here is that we've got to learn to have the courage to live with this chaos and not identify with it. And it's like you're living in a room like a house of 100 people all chatting away all day. We've got to learn to hear them, but learn not to identify with them. Let them be there. Don't make them go away. Don't wish they'd go away. But hear what they're saying and learn to stay focused and just keep plodding, doing what we're doing until eventually they will go away. But it's a long-term process. Does that make sense? Good. That's just a good point. But the Buddha would say they're all yours by definition. Nobody can put those thoughts into you. You can hear somebody else shouting, I kill you every day, and then you can start repeating it. But you won't buy into I will kill you every day if that's not in your mind already, if that's not your tendency. That's a really important point. And that we can prove every day. I remember one white supremacist boy in America I read about. He was 19. And he said, when I read Hitler, I found like I'd come home. Everything he said was exactly what I felt. Now, someone else who, say, read Hitler would be horrified and shocked and would walk away from it. The difference is because the person who walked away didn't have those views in their mind already, and the boy had Hitler's views already. And that's how we all are. How come I first heard Buddhism? I thought, wow, I've come home. I recognize this. That's because I must have had these thoughts before. So what we hear outside does affect us, but we only bring it internally inside us if it feeds into what's already there. And in that sense, I want to kill somebody is still my thought, even though I heard someone else say it. But they're saying it triggered mine. It's my thoughts. And the Buddha would, of course, say that we came programmed with every single tiny one of our own tendencies from the first second of conception, from having thought them before. That's a simple, really, logic of karma. Is one way karma works is its habit. Because the Buddha says, nothing we think or do or say goes astray. Geshe Tashi in London said it's like we're shooting a movie all day. Everything that we experience through any of our senses is imprinted in the mind and just sits there as memories. That's how I can remember anything. And that's how eventually, as we progress in our practice and you get single-pointed concentration and you go to a subtler level, that you can get what they call clairvoyance. You can remember past lives and future and the minds of others. This fits with the Buddha's view about the mind. But it's the courage to see what's in the mind, which is chaos, but then to learn to know we can be in control of what thoughts we have now, to sow new habits in the mind. In other words, you've been playing the piano like a crazy person all your life, just bashing the notes. That's an old habit. But now you can learn Bach. And you can't make all the old habits go away, but by playing Bach, you play a new set of habits which subdue the previous habits. That's what practice is from now. Do you understand? But we've got to be brave, because the habits are very deep. Do you understand, Howard? Good. Who else? Yes.
How long past stage 1, as you call it, kindergarten level?
It all depends on where, it's like if you're Kandrila, this amazing student of Lama Zopa's, she came into this life kind of fully developed. She just had to hear it and see it once and it was there. So it depends on how much you've done before. So if you're one of those little girls when you see on YouTube, they almost don't seem possible. Maybe they phototube YouTube, I don't know what, but Photoshop YouTube, these little 3-year-olds playing Bach, Clearly, or this other girl, little 6-year-old American girl writing orchestral pieces for 50-piece orchestras. Clearly, she went through the stages pretty quickly because she came already advanced. So the answer is how much you've done already yourself. Because we don't all start from the same point. That's the answer. And the fact is also, you're going to be practicing junior school all the way to enlightenment. The difference is your junior school increase. A person who's in university level who plays junior school plays the best junior school possible. So that you don't stop it and then go to the next one. But all of it becomes integrated and you apply whatever level of knowledge you've got to all your previous knowledge as well, and that deepens it. So it's constant, ongoing. Do you understand? And in one day, what she's referring to, the junior school. This is the way I really like to Buddha's got this, especially the Tibetans, and especially Tsongkhapa, our 14th century lineage Lama. He calls all his presentation of all Buddha's teachings from A to Z, which he's taken from all the vast body of the literature, the metaphysics, the philosophy, the psychology, and presented to this package called the Lam Rim, which again is one of these arcane words from the 14th century. Path, gradual. Well, a modern term in my understanding that translates that perfectly, and the meaning is conveyed to us very well, is the word course. You go to do a course. You're going to study a course at university. You become a 7-year course to become a doctor, a weekend course to learn how to make a chocolate cake, a 5-year course to become a something else. So we understand the concept of a course. It's gradual. And of course, in English, for us in Australia, for example, it's even more strong because you've got junior school, you do grade 1, grade 2, you go to high school, grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, you go to university, and then you go to postgraduate, and then you graduate. That's a perfect way to say, and as Dalai Lama said, this Lam Rim is like the education system. And again, that's one of the points that we're not used to thinking of spiritual teachings in that concept, in that context, as gradual, as progressive, as according to your capacity. But when we get that, it's very powerful. So this Lam Rim contains all the major points from the philosophy, the psychology, the metaphysics, all the way from A to Z. It's all in that package. So the essence of junior school, which the Tibetans call the practice, Lama Zopa politely refers to it in the medieval way of talking like Tsongkhapa does, respecting the lineage, it's the practices and teachings suitable to the disciple of the least capability. Well, it's a very nice way of saying junior school. I like it, but I'd rather say junior school, so we get it, Then the second lot is the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability. Well, I call it high school. I don't know how you call it in Zurich. And then you've got university, the greatest capability. And then you've got postgraduate, Tantra. So if you think of that, the essence of junior school is the law of karma. We're going to go into this. Controlling your body and speech. Why? Because they're driven by the crazy delusions right now, the crazy kleshas. So we've got to calm down the servants of our mind. That's the first level, and that's pretty profound already. Then you go to the next level, you calm down to some degree. Now you've got the luxury to look at your mind itself, which is the source of the problem. And now you unpack and unravel these crazy, toxic emotions and really become familiar with them and really see with compassion towards yourself how they cause you suffering and break your own heart. Then you've got renunciation. That's junior school and high school. And if you graduate there, you become liberated. You're a Hinayana practitioner and you're out of here. You don't come back. But you can go further onto university. And so the first one is abide by the laws of karma. The second one is become your own therapist, know your own mind. The third one, university, that's compassion wing. That's the bodhicitta wing. That's where now your main emphasis is to help others on the basis of what you've accomplished in the first lot. And then finally you go to Tantra, Vajrayana, part of the Mahayana, where you graduate. So that's the entire package. Now the point is, Stefania's point, in one day, you will do all of these. So you might say a mantra one day. That's Tantra. As soon as you see Chen raising, that's Tantra. As soon as you say Om Mani Padme Hum, that's Tantra. You might be kind to your husband instead of mean to him. Are you being kind to him lately? Is she really? Oh, there you go. I'm so happy. So that means you're practicing the compassion wing, university. Another time you might not say a word and control your thoughts. You might control your thoughts and say, shut up, Stefania, don't have that thought. That's high school. And the other time you might just stop saying the word. That's junior school. So when you know the different levels of practice, and that's the essence, then it really helps you understand the entire path to enlightenment because you know where you're at. And you've got a toolkit, in other words. So if you, let's say, have an attachment to alcohol, let's say, you know your main practice is leave the alcohol there. That's junior school. Don't touch it. Leave it. If you haven't got a problem with alcohol, but you know you could be difficult, you might control your thoughts and stop thinking about it. And if you really have no problem with alcohol, you'll happily have a glass of wine with another person because they invited you for dinner and you'll drink it for their sake because it's such a delicious wine. You've got to know where you're at every time. And then you apply any of these tools. But when you know the level of the tools, this is the revelation that really helps us understand the whole packaging. But that takes time, Do you understand? Good. What time is it? Pardon? Take me what? I'm not anywhere. I'm just... No, I'm just doing my job, What's this? Hang on. What's the schedule for lunch? We don't have one. Okay, good. Do you want a tea break? Do you want a break? You want a break? Okay, have a break. Where do you have your break? Oh, good, okay. Well, I'll stay downstairs then. I'll read my iPad. Okay. So happy to see you. Good, darling. I know. Good.